Beach House are a household name, a staple, if you will, in the world of indie music, a critical indie darling. That surpassed the indie label, really, when you think that they are pretty popular and can make some big moves when it comes to, you know, festival headliners and things like that across all kinds of different countries. It's good to see because they are a really enjoyable, easygoing band that makes some really beautiful, meandering dream pop music that you can really get yourself lost in, regardless of any album you pick. It seems as though that I think there are two albums of theirs that most people agree are amongst their best, Bloom and Teen Dream. But amongst the rest of the other albums, there are fan favourites, there are ones that people will, you know, take to their grave with them. They will fight tooth and nail to claim that these albums are masterpieces. And while I've not loved everything they've ever done, the two albums I did mention are easily my favourite two in their whole discography. I still always appreciate what they do, and for the most part enjoy most of the albums that they've put out since the early 2000s. Oh no, mid 2000s. They've certainly got their obvious influences. I don't think anyone would even dispute such a claim. You know, dream pop has been going since the 80s, 90s. Shoegaze has been such a big thing since that era as well. You know, Beach House, you can point to 5, 6, 7, 8 other bands that were doing what they were doing years before what they were doing. But they're a good example of doing a genre justice and taking it beyond, and maybe doing it a little bit better than some of the classic bands, in my opinion. Just saying, you know, not every pioneer does it the best. You can pioneer something, but someone else can come along later on and maybe do it better. So yeah, I certainly hold them highly and was definitely anticipating what they were going to drop with this new album here, the Mammoth release, dropping a week apart from Big Thief's album, which was also their Mammoth huge release that we haven't quite seen either band do before. Beach House have neared our run times before, of course, but this one felt different. They were releasing it in stages, chapters. We had the first chapter that came out a while ago, and then they've just kind of dropped drib drabs of the album since then. So it was interesting to see what kind of album we'd get, considering the style of how they released it and how they haven't really done that before. I've got to be honest, as big of a fan as I am, I'm pretty underwhelmed with the overall product that we got here. I think the particular chapters themselves can vary in quality. I think there's some really great chapters, and then there's some dud ones, and even sometimes where the great music comes, it doesn't stay consistent for the entire runtime of that particular chapter. I didn't play the album in the stages that it came out. I've waited till it's come out to play it all in one sitting, really. I don't know if that's the wrong way to listen to this. Is there a wrong way to really listen to an album? I don't know, but surely they're all part of a collective unit. It's a collective album that runs for nearly 90 minutes. And I don't know if the whole thing really lives up to anything more than just okay. So regardless of how you play it, how you choose to play it, isolating songs, isolating some of the chapters, the music just generally isn't really at their peak. It's kind of just meh at points for me. The one-two punch of Once Twice Melody, the title track, and Superstar is sublime. These tracks are some of the most magical moments on the album. I love the vocal melody on Once Twice Melody. I think that is potentially just the peak of the album, which comes right at the beginning. I think this track is absolutely stellar. I think it's up there with some of their best songs. I like the way that the vocals take a bit more of a front and center sort of approach, because sometimes, you know, with some of their albums, it can be washed in all the reverb and the vocals aren't always the front and center of it all. But when they do that on tracks like this, I think they sound fantastic. There's no denying that Victoria has a stunning voice, so when you hear it so up front in the mix, I'm just always happy to hear it. And la 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 la. It's so adorable. It just makes the whole thing sound really magical and dreamy. I adore the instrumental on it as well. Superstar, the exact same. Both tracks, a lot of the same qualities are really kind of replicated. So immediately I'm like, okay, already this is going to be something fantastic. It's going to be grand. It's going to be epic. There's an epic feel to these tracks that I thought was going to carry on and carry over and bleed into the rest of the album. But I don't know if it really does. It already feels like the spark, the flame, whatever you want to call it, dies out with Pink Funeral. I just think the repetition and the dragging out of the Pink Funeral refrain part just really sounds quite drony. And the whole thing, I just think vocally underwhelms. Like, I'm lost in what they're doing already. And I just think the strengths that they were playing to on the first two tracks is just like thrown out the window. And I'm just left with some really underwhelming vocal performances. The instrumental sounds typical for what they usually do, but it's just underwhelming vocally, really. And there's a good few times on this album where like the vocals just feel like that. They're just drenched in I guess apathy, it could be the word. It just feels like there's not a huge amount of effort going into the melodies, and the vocals just kind of become a bit of a slog to sit through, which I know won't go down too well with the core fan base, but let's not forget that I do think like vocally Victoria can be stunning, and I just think so many of these tracks lose that. Runaway as well. Runaway, man. What is going on with the vocals here? They sound so weirdly robotic. I guess I kind of appreciate that they've tried something different with the vocals on this, but god, just don't try that different thing ever again. Just pulls you out of the atmosphere so poorly. It just cuts like a knife through the atmosphere. Seriously, man, I just don't think the album is going for this vibe at all, so these vocals here just ruin it. I do like other tracks though. I think Over and Over, there's this really like wonderful cascading melody that just swarms the song and just lifts it to a really nice level. And not many of the other tracks have this like one aspect of it that just kind of sweeps you off your feet, but this one track I think really just subtly elevates the album to a different level. I kind of wish there were more sparkling moments like that. This track just feels so beautiful and grand and luxurious, and I don't necessarily feel that same way about so many other tracks. And let's not forget, there's a lot of tracks on this album, man. The separation of the chapters themselves don't really feel like adding much. Like, if you didn't know that the album was released in the way it was, or you didn't see the track list say like track 1, which indicates you're at a new chapter, you wouldn't know. Like, if you just played it all in one and just let it run without knowing any information about the album, you wouldn't know why Sunset, for example, is the start of anything new. I just don't see what the point of that is. And even without thinking of that, the track itself just doesn't really feel like it's starting anything new. It's nice, but it just underwhelms massively because it just feels like they're doing what they already do with every other track, essentially. That for me is what makes an album like Bloom special. Like, sure, yeah, there isn't a huge differentiation between the tracks, but there are subtle changes within the tracks. And the beauty and the magic behind it all just takes you away to a new world. And you don't necessarily feel like you're listening to the same song repeated over and over again. But this album just feels like it's missing that spark at times. And tracks like Sunset just feel like a replication of other songs on the album. Another go round. It's just so unnecessarily dreary. They never do this with their sound. They've never been good at, doing these like really ominous, dreary instrumentals that just sound so and just feel like a slog to sit through. That's not their strength. I mean, why would Once Twice Melody be such a good song if it weren't for the fact that it's so bright and magical sounding? Like, why would they make this song? I do think a few tracks take a slightly different direction though that work in the favor. Only You Know. I mean, this track feels very beefy with the instrumental. Like, the guitars are really chunky, the drums are really prominent. It feels like they're almost, delivering a rock song, to be honest, with this one, which I really like. And I think tracks like this slightly go off and differentiate in a good way. I commend them for these tracks because it does sound unique to what they've done, and it sounds good as well, to be fair. Masquerade's a really strange one for me as well, because the introduction to the track reminds me a lot of Alarm Call by Björk, and I would never think a Beach House song would ever remind me of such a such a unique sounding Björk song, because even that track within the context of Homogenic is very different as well. So to hear that on a Beach House album was very like strange, but I'm not against it by any means. But for all the surprises like in this track, you know, you get a run of tracks that are just a bit yeah, okay, fine, it sounds okay, yeah, sure, but doesn't really lift me in a particular direction, doesn't really make me feel anything in particular. It just sounds like by the numbers Beach House stuff, until really Finale. I think this is one of the best tracks. Really love this one. It's a shame it comes so late. It's the final chapter, so of course I guess they had to make something a bit more explosive to kick off the final 5th chapter. It definitely leaves an impression. It's such a major climactic moment. You could actually have this as the final song on the whole thing, because the actual final song once again goes for a bit of a doomy feeling, to be honest. It does feel like a sense of doom is looming over you. It sounds better than Another Go Round, but even still, not really my usual love for a Beach House track, this kind of sound, to be fair. Many Nights is absolutely lovely as well. That comes in the final chapter. The very ASMR feel to the song, the almost like, you know, daydream nature of it all, just feels like you're being, you know, swept away. You're drifting along. The song is taking you to a new place that you've never seen before. It's so comforting, it's so pillowy, it's so cushiony. It's a really nice track, and to be fair, while they're doing so little with what they're doing, it does a lot while doing that. So there's definitely great moments. I mean, Bells comes in this final chapter too, not one of my favorites. Sounds a bit too much like Stay Another Day, that Christmas track. I think the vocal melody reminds me a lot of that. Just a bit of a cheesiness to this one, which I wasn't expecting. But yeah, overall, I mean, there's like great moments, and then there's so many other moments that just kind of underwhelm, really. I'm just a bit disappointed that I've not come out of this being swept away by what they were doing. There's some grand, luxurious instrumentals at times, but then there's a lot of it that just kind of goes in one ear, out of the other. I just don't think vocally we're getting the best Beach House performances. Instrumentally, at times, it can be a bit of meh too, but I don't know, I just think for all the tracks that you get on this album, out of all of them, I don't really feel like there are that many that I'd go back to be honest, or that many that I can say I truly really like. And for all the reasons I've already basically said, it's a shame, but I still think there's a lot to like about this album, and maybe on any other given day, maybe in the future, maybe later on, I'd go back to this and find some beauty in it, because I think there is potential of that, because personally I haven't loved a lot of Beach House's recent material, so maybe it just is a right time, sort of right place situation for me. Like they might click one day and I'll just be completely taken aback. But for now, in this moment, I'm not really all that impressed with this album overall. I'm gonna go 5.5 out of 10. Don't be too mad at the score though, because I think there's a lot to like about this album. There's a lot to appreciate with what they've done as well, and there's a lot of tracks that I do actually really like. But just as an overall album experience, yeah, I just wasn't taken aback by much of this, and I wanted to be, because that's usually what I want from Beach House, but it just didn't quite deliver. Do let me know your thoughts. I would love to see what people think of this one. It does seem to be getting a lot of praise from the core Beach House fandom, which is good to see. I'm still a fan of them regardless, but for me this one wasn't quite as good as I wanted it to be. But I think a lot of people will be impressed with this one. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do subscribe if you haven't already. Have a good day, and goodbye.